Story 1. OpenAI was founded as a nonprofit to ensure that artificial intelligence would not benefit only large corporations like Google, but would instead benefit all of humanity and be developed safely. Instead, OpenAI has become another large corporation and has pushed Google and other companies into a race to release artificial intelligence products as quickly as possible regardless of negative impacts. It has not delivered any tangible safety technology. OpenAI's nonprofit board attempted to remove Sam Altman, but the for-profit division had become so powerful that the effort failed. Employees opposed the action to avoid lowering the value of their shares in an upcoming funding round, with some threatening to quit. Additionally, Microsoft, which owns a significant stake in OpenAI, threatened to replicate OpenAI internally, outside the control of the nonprofit board. Story 2. Probably many politicians. Some enter politics to fix things and improve the country for everyday people. But the system either defeats them, causing them to leave, or they slowly become corrupt leaders focused only on making money at the people's expense. Story 3. Anyone with generational trauma. Growing up, I always swore that I would never be like my dad or his dad. Sometimes I find myself being very much like my dad. Story 4. Here's something not political. Streaming platforms. They initially existed to outcompete cable and allow you to access movies and TV shows without ads for a small monthly fee instead of hundreds of dollars. Now, there are 1,000 of them. They all cost much more. The one you have never has the content you want, and they serve you ads regardless. They are literally just becoming cable television channels. Story 5. Everyone who said, "Do not believe everything you read on the internet 30 years ago." Story 6. Dating applications are designed to help you connect and find better matches. However, they can sometimes reduce the chance of forming meaningful connections and finding quality matches. Story 7. The friend who said they hated meetings became a manager and now books 5 quick synchronization meetings before lunch. Story 8. Graham crackers were created by a preacher named Sylvester Graham as part of a diet designed to be as bland as possible. Originally, they were unsweetened, plain crackers. This was part of a larger movement of bland dieting. People believed this would suppress certain desires. Now they are used in s'mores. Story 9. Kanye West. Story 10. Bridget Coleman grew up in post-World War II Germany, learning that the Nazis and their anti-Semitism were the epitome of evil. She went on to hijack a plane full of Jewish passengers, aligning with the vaguely leftist Islamist Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. When they landed in Uganda, they kept the Jewish passengers, not just Israelis, as hostages. She sorted and interrogated them to determine who was truly Jewish. How do you focus so hard and miss the whole picture? Story 11. Communist revolutions aimed for equality, utopia, and rights. However, when they achieved power, they resulted in dictatorships, oppression, and tyranny. Story 12. When I grew up, there were kids who immigrated from another country. They were well-meaning and tried to fit in, but they were constantly picked on, jumped, and beaten. They became more disillusioned as they grew older, and by their teen years they banded together and took revenge. They went from scholars to gangsters. Eventually, they got involved in organized crime and were part of activities ranging from drugs to firearms. Except for 3 guys from that group, I am pretty sure the rest are dead, in prison, or on the run. Story 13. In 1981, I watched Emma Thompson as a student performing a comedy monologue she wrote herself, which was a superb parody of the sort of mock-modest, gushing speech you hear when a British actress receives an Oscar for Best Leading Actress. 11 years later, she gave an almost identical performance on stage at the Academy Awards when she received the award for Best Leading Actress. Story 14. George Lucas acknowledged he became the Hollywood machine he fought when making Star Wars. Story 15. Children who promised they would never be like their parents, then one day hear themselves say, "We have food at home." Story 16. Everyone becomes what they swore to destroy. Only Gabriel Newell is eternal. Story 17. He never meant it, but Donald Trump did swear to expose pedophiles and end the deep state, whereas now. Story 18. As a Christian, I saw many people identifying as Christians hating gay and transgender people, hating liberals, and hating others. This drove me nuts because love is the central tenet of Christianity. Over time, I came to hate those people giving Christians a bad name, which created a crisis in me. Fortunately, this situation ultimately destroyed my belief in God altogether, so now I am free to hate people as much as I want. Story 19. Austin Pets Alive, a large animal rescue organization in Texas with plans to expand nationwide, recently identified themselves as pro-life for pets and inadvertently admitted to operating like a puppy mill. The leader believes that if every family wanting to buy a pet came to her instead of a breeder, there would be no pet overpopulation. However, recognizing that people seek specific breeds, she has spent 30 years taking pregnant dogs from city shelters, funded by public money, allowing them to give birth, and then selling the puppies. This is essentially breeding, but with a continuous supply of new mothers, all supported by government funds. In a way, it is brilliant in its calculated level of cruelty. Story 20. People who talked about freedom of speech elected a person who actively punishes people who exercise their speech. Story 21. I am a moderate independent, so it has been fascinating to watch shifts in Republicans and Democrats over the years. The Republican Party went from making fun of the left for being thin-skinned snowflakes, argumentative over-reliance on appeals to emotion, such as "won't somebody think of the children," excessive government bloat and regulating people's individual behavior, and the perception they wanted to spy on you in your own home, as well as unnecessary and wasteful spending, to all of that on steroids. The right has become the biggest group of disingenuous crybabies, melting down like toddlers at even the slightest hint of diversity, equity, and inclusion or woke issues, whether real or imagined. Story 22. Alex Jones. He started as a small government, states' rights, libertarian freedom fighter type with a heavy dose of conspiracy thinking. What is his take on Donald Trump sending in the National Guard to Washington, D.C.? Go for it, the city is unsafe. It turns out Jones mainly cares about getting rich from supplement sales and white people having power. Story 23. Politicians, many of them, start out saying they will fight corruption and will never be like those greedy people in power. Story 24. A local I know went to law school and became an attorney general advocating abstinence who oversees an alcohol court-ordered rehabilitation program. She is a closet alcoholic telling alcoholics that alcohol is bad. Hypocrite. Audrey, you are a hypocrite. Story 25. Google started with the motto, "Don't be evil," but is now accused of monopolistic practices, censorship, and privacy violations. Facebook, now Meta, was created to connect the world, but is now accused of dividing society, spreading misinformation, and damaging mental health. Cable television was supposed to be an alternative to broadcast television with fewer advertisements. Now it has more advertisements than regular television channels. Streaming services like Netflix and Hulu were supposed to replace expensive cable packages. Now you need more than 10 different subscriptions to watch what you want. Story 26. The United States Prohibition Bureau in the 1920s was formed to combat alcohol consumption. However, agents frequently operated their own illegal alcohol distribution activities. Story 27. Netflix was originally an alternative to box rental stores and was promoted as being cheaper, easier to access, and offering a massive library. Now, renting from your local Redbox is probably cheaper and has a better selection of new releases than Netflix. If you want to watch something good from 10 to 20 years ago, Netflix probably does not have it. You will need Paramount Plus or another platform because the companies that own the intellectual property for those popular movies have started their own streaming services, requiring separate subscriptions. Every streaming platform that 20 years ago advertised, "cut the cord and save," is now more expensive than cable ever was. Story 28. The Republican Party said they wanted to balance the budget and reduce the national debt. They have voted repeatedly to increase it. They also advocated for smaller government intrusion on society and personal freedom. Story 29. J.K. Rowling. As a struggling immigrant queer middle schooler in the 1990s and early 2000s, Harry Potter was my saving grace and educator in many ways. My English improved, and I developed a clear sense of right and wrong, with morality rooted in character rather than bloodlines or power structures. The acceptance and inclusion of various creatures and humans united against a common enemy uplifted the marginalized. Love was Harry and his friend's greatest weapon. Fast forward to today, with her reputation in opposition to transgender people, she has become the very amoral, opportunistic, alienating, and exclusive figure she once warned against in her writings. Story 30. Kristen Sinema, Arizona senator who ran as a working-class, relatable Democrat committed to fighting for the poor in Arizona. Within a year or two, on a salary of $175,000, her estimated net worth increased by millions. She publicly left the Democratic Party to become an independent and has voted inconsistently on various issues. She was influenced by lobbying money and abandoned her principles. Story 31. J.K. Rowling. The Harry Potter books had Voldemort, an evil authoritarian who hated people he deemed lesser. Now J.K. Rowling is an evil authoritarian who hates people she deems lesser. Story 32. Independent media such as long-form interview podcasts ended up degenerating into platforms for individuals who were either compensated or deceived by Donald Trump and helped him get elected a second time by giving him and millions of other far-right figures numerous interviews filled with easy, soft questions. This is mainly due to the YouTube algorithm promoting the worst individuals, making their podcasts the most popular. Story 33. From what I could tell, Joseph Stalin, when he was young, advocated against government corruption. Also, he was attractive. In a way, he was like Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader. Story 34. The internet technology entrepreneurs who became the largest military contractors behind the scenes, plus the cryptocurrency freedom advocates who act like authoritarians. Basically, a group of former mathematics and computer science enthusiasts who now openly enjoy bullying people. Story 35. Google used to have in their mission statement, "Do no evil." They removed that years ago because it was an impediment to being evil. Story 36. Google removed "Do not be evil" from their company guidelines. Story 37. Activision was started by a group of game developers who felt they were being taken advantage of by Atari. Story 38. Anakin Skywalker was supposed to destroy the Sith, not join them. Story 39. Joe Rogan became rich and complained about coffee not tasting good, while he himself previously criticized rich people for suddenly finding problems like having bad coffee. Story 40. The pro-Palestinian protesters who shut down the Pride Parade in Canada. Story 41. The United States wanted to get rid of a king. Look at them now. Story 42. Google's old slogan, or maybe it was one of their guiding principles, was "Do no evil." I do not believe it is part of their mantra anymore. Story 43. Parents. Every single one of us swore we would be the cool parent. Then one day you hear yourself say, "Because I said so," and it is over. Story 44. All streaming services are now simply television delivered over the internet. Story 45. Not a real example, but reading this made me think of Anakin Skywalker in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Story 46. For an example where reasonable people can disagree on whether the very thing they swore to destroy was bad to begin with, consider the German Greens and their stance on pacifism. In 1983, they were hardcore pacifists of the better read than dead kind, inspired by the song 99 Luftballons. By 2003, they were moving away from strict pacifism. They still opposed President George W. Bush's Iraq intervention but had approved the first German armed forces interventions ever, in Kosovo in 1999 and Afghanistan in 2001. This caused significant controversy within the party at the time. By 2023, they had become fully liberal interventionists from Lisbon to Luhansk. The Greens were the most pro-Ukraine of the three parties in Chancellor Olaf Scholz's government. There was no intra-party controversy this time, as all the pacifists had already left. Story 47. The United States of America and their quest for world peace ended up becoming the most warlike country in the history of the earth. Japan's Pan-Asian ideals led them to invade most of East and Southeast Asia, which resulted in a unified effort by those countries to repel the Japanese forces. Story 48. The houses of York and Lancaster fought against each other for the English crown during the War of the Roses. To settle the war after many deaths, Henry Tudor, from the House of Lancaster and father of Henry VIII, married Elizabeth of York, beginning the Tudor dynasty. Story 49. I think Elon Musk has definitely taken a turn for the worse. Yes, he was not perfect in the past, but considering his high reputation 8 years ago, things have changed drastically. Story 50. The boys were laughing at all the superhero spin-offs, and now look at them. Story 51. There are many examples of people who started out as champions against injustice and corruption, but over time they began to behave the same way. What do you think is the real reason? Greed, pressure, or the difficulty of staying true to their principles all the time? Story 52. Republicans are obsessing over child sex trafficking and are now supporting child abusers. Story 53. Conservatives supporting Make America Great Again often claim to favor small government, states' rights, and balanced budgets, but it was mostly talk. Story 54. Netflix and other streaming movie and television services. Almost every politician everywhere. Feminists. Pepsi. Story 55. The Grand Old Party is no longer based on conservative values. They are openly advocating for a dictatorship, the armed federal occupation of local cities, government ownership of private corporations, and are against freedom of speech. Story 56. The Republican Party seems like the obvious answer in the United States of America. Ostensibly anti-communist and against price controls and a centralized economy, pro-free trade, supporting small government, pro-constitution, and rule of law, it used to be pro-immigrant. Now it is the opposite of all that. Not just turned away from those principles, but the glaring, burning opposite. The thing is, it's not so much that they changed as that they were always this way, and the mask slowly, or not so slowly, slipped off to reveal a Scooby-Doo-like villain who is basically a modern monarchist or feudalist. Story 57. Mexican-American immigrants. I am a proud Chicano, but it is very upsetting. To go from experiencing negative stereotypes to attitudes of exclusion toward newcomers is absolutely depressing to see. No one dislikes undocumented Mexican immigrants more than legal Mexican Americans, even if their ancestors were undocumented themselves. Story 58. Democrats. The party of the working class has turned into the party of banking elitists. It is not the party I have known my entire life. They are out of touch with reality and unwilling to take action. Story 59. Today's Israel is the exact kind of people their grandparents hid under floorboards from. Story 60. Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and streaming services have all lowered quality and increased costs. Story 61. For all the complaints about federal government overreach, the Republicans in America are surprisingly silent about our free fall into dictatorship. Story 62. Israelis say never again, but they are doing it in Palestine. Story 63. The parliamentarian side in the English Civil War killed a king and established a republic because the king was not giving Parliament sufficient input into policy and tried to forcibly shut them down. He ended up refusing to permit Parliament to determine policy and shut it down by force several times. By the end of the Republican experiment, the Lord Protector was king in all but name, and the other house was the House of Lords in all but name. The Commons was still angry. No wonder it all collapsed after Cromwell died. Story 64. Alex Jones was probably always an authoritarian, but he certainly supports many things he used to denounce. Story 65. Alan Pinkerton was exiled from Scotland for being the rough equivalent of a leveler, a kind of Christian-flavored anarcho-socialist. The original charter for the agency specifically stated that peaceful organized labor was not under the umbrella of targets. What changed? Basically, once you are assigned to a couple of deeply unpeaceful labor organizations, right when you are on the rebound from a major financial panic, suddenly all that money looks really good. Story 66. Most dictators rise to power saying they want to end corruption, make the country better, and fix many of the country's problems. However, once they assume power, they have to make the same decisions as their predecessor because it is the only way the system works. As a result, they compromise and become a new face of the same problems. They also do not trust anyone else to lead the country, so they keep the power for themselves, which often leads to another uprising. What is needed is a leader who wants power only to obtain it and then willingly relinquishes it, but that rarely happens. Story 67. Come on, people. Let us not act self-righteous. If more than one of us had the opportunity to join the government compound, we would do it. Once we are there, one may get corrupted. Story 68. Gangs. The Bloods and Crips began as protection circles. And as membership grew, they needed funding. They turned to selling drugs, and the rest is history. They are not the only vigilante groups that turned gangster. Mexico is experiencing its share of this with groups such as Los Zetas and Knights Templars, cartels that originally started as vigilante groups against the cartels. They needed money to operate and had all these drugs they confiscated, leading to some hazards. The most infamous or dangerous gang in the world, Mara Salvatrucha 13, also began as an immigrant protection group, rallying Salvadoran immigrants who needed assistance. What makes Mara Salvatrucha 13 particularly brutal is that most early vigilante members were ex-military veterans of the Salvadoran Civil War, and they used their skills to make a name for themselves. Vigilantes sound appealing on paper, but humans often go astray, sometimes to the extreme. Story 69. The Drug Enforcement Administration has caused more damage and harmed more people than drugs ever could. The damage done to civil rights in the name of drug prohibition has been staggering. Billions of dollars lost through non-criminal civil asset forfeiture. Millions incarcerated. Hundreds of thousands of lives destroyed. We would be better off with all the drugs and none of the Drug Enforcement Administration's interference, considering we still have all the drugs. Story 70. Shepard Fairey's art career started as an anti-advertising, anti-product, and disestablishmentarian movement. You can buy Obey merchandise at Nordstrom. Story 71. Marshal Pétain. In World War I, he commanded the French army valiantly, holding off the German invaders during the most bloody battles of the entire war. He spent the interwar period loved by the public as a national hero. Then in World War II, he collaborated with the Nazis and sold his country out to them. He became the head of the Vichy government and aided the Nazis in fighting the French resistance and detaining Jews. Story 72. Airbnb. Once an affordable alternative to traditional hotels, now a fee-based service that charges guests for self-housekeeping. Story 73. My old-style broom just drops straws from the brush at this point. Story 74. My dad and mom's love language is pretty much negging. They think giving compliments will make someone weak or full of themselves. I swore not to be like that. I was called out by my friends for being like my dad, making fun of them and being sarcastic, a mix of my parents' negging characteristics. I am so thankful I still have them in my life, but it has caused problems with my family, other friends, and even relationships. My relatives really think lowly of me, and I am constantly iced out of things unless it is legal matters I need to handle. Basically, they are cordial out of obligation. While I can say I was very much unaware I was acting the way I am, the damage is done, so I am living and working with who and what I have to cherish them as much as I can. Story 75. Enshittification, also known as crapification and platform decay, is a pattern in which two-sided online products and services decline in quality over time. Initially, vendors create high-quality offerings to attract users. Then they degrade those offerings to better serve business customers, such as advertisers, and finally degrade their services to users and business customers to maximize profits for shareholders. Story 76. Vidkun Quisling was a famous humanitarian and protector of human rights, as well as a proud spokesman of Norwegian national identity before he fell into fascism and betrayed his homeland to the Nazis, handing control of Norway to the Germans and attempting to establish a puppet government to serve them. He was widely hated for his high treason and hypocrisy. After their exile ended, the Norwegian government legalized the death penalty solely to execute him, then repealed it immediately afterward. Story 77. I think the person who invented K-cups did so to reduce gas emissions for the betterment of the environment, believing people would not have to wait in drive-thrus as much. However, K-cups are now single-use plastics filling up landfills. Story 78. The Arctic Monkeys, from Fake Tales of San Francisco to now. Story 79. Bolsheviks in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, although their intentions were likely evil from the start. Story 80. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, former president of Mexico. His worst enemy is his old self. There is much content, tweets, videos, quotes, interviews, condemning what other parties did to assume office and then do worse. Story 81. QAnon went from The government is full of pedophiles harvesting adrenochrome from kids in this pizza parlor basement that has no basement, and our guy is going to uncover it. 2. Our guy is definitely not an obvious pedophile groomer who has been abusing children, is friends with the most infamous pedophile groomers of all time, and is now trying to set them free to hide his role in pedophile grooming. No conspiracy here, move right along. Story 82. Vietnam had its own conflict in Cambodia after defeating the United States. Story 83. My friend in college, who firmly believed that the ruling class uses culture wars to divide us, became a born-again Christian and now believes that there are too many women pastors and that this is ruining religion. Story 84. To be honest, it's me, it's you, and all of us. We are good and evil. There is no need for me to write an essay here. I just look back at my childhood, adulthood, and now going into old age and really see that it's not the linear trajectory we always thought we were aiming for. I am glad it's not linear or rigid. Compromise and being in the middle are easier to survive. That's what makes life easier to live and share. Story 85. Donald J. Trump right now, but he was lying about draining anything. He always wanted to own the swamp. Story 86. The administrator of this Facebook fitness group that is against bullying will bully people for not thinking like he does. He will leave posts made in good faith so people can take potshots at the original poster because the post is not to their liking, even though it does not break any rules. I know this is not exactly what this post is about, but it baffles me whenever I see this in that group. Story 87. Feminists used to be against body shaming, but now they often body shame men as a rite of passage. Story 88. When Barack Obama was president, my dad told me the left was trying to do all the things the right is doing now. He said it was bad and explained why the left was evil. Guess who fully supports it now since it is Donald Trump himself? Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.